Iron Palm Legacy, Jet's Urban Ascent. Chapter 1. Dawn of the Storm. The sun was beginning to crest over the horizon, casting a warm, golden light across the city. Atlanta was still and quiet in the early morning hours, the faint hum of distant traffic blending with the soft chirping of birds just waking. Jet Wu moved fluidly through a complex kata on the rooftop of the Iron Palm Academy, each motion deliberate and powerful, his breath in sync with the controlled movements of his body. Jet Wu had an unobstructed view of the city skyline stretching out from the rooftop, each building outlined in the gentle glow of dawn. To the east, the iconic silhouette of the Bank of America Plaza loomed, its spire catching the first rays of sunlight. Further south, he could make out the rounded top of the Mercedes-Benz Stadium, a beacon of the city's vibrant sports culture. The air was cool and fresh, and as Jet moved fluidly through his kata, he felt as though he were part of the city itself, his breath matching the rhythm of the waking world around him. His movements were deliberate and powerful, his arms slicing through the air as he shifted stances. Around him, the rooftops of the old Fourth Ward district sprawled in a patchwork of red brick and weathered metal, the buildings a mix of historic warehouses and newer loft apartments, each with its character etched into its walls by time. Across the street, the rooftops formed a jagged line, their varying heights giving the impression of a stairway leading up toward the gleaming high-rises of downtown. He could see small details from up here, a garden on a nearby rooftop, its plants arranged in tidy rows, and further down the block, a painted mural splashed across the side of an old building, depicting the faces of civil rights leaders who had once walked these very streets. The rooftop training space was a hidden gem, an open area surrounded by the faded red bricks of the building and bordered by the Atlanta skyline. It was Jet's favorite place to train, especially at sunrise. He had been up here almost every morning since he was old enough to remember. As he moved, Jet focused on the feeling of the cool morning air brushing against his skin and the steady thud of his bare feet against the rooftop's weathered surface. His arms extended and retracted, and he shifted from stance to stance, effortlessly transitioning between strikes and blocks. It was a routine he had practiced countless times under his grandfather's watchful eye. But now, alone on the rooftop, he allowed himself to flow with his instincts, blending the motions he'd been taught with his improvisations. He felt a surge of excitement as he added a spin to a familiar sequence, feeling the power in his body as he twisted through the air and landed solidly, the sunrise framing him like a painting. The Iron Palm technique was a powerful art form. It was developed thousands of years ago and is rumored to predate martial arts. It took years to learn and longer still to perfect. Jet always wondered how his grandfather had mastered it. He was yet to master the fifth stance in the scroll his father had shown him. It was old and weathered, with the edges falling off. Jet could hardly read the words written in ancient Chinese characters. His grandfather had shown him them once. He preferred learning from him than trying to understand the drawings and indecipherable characters. Jet took a moment to catch his breath, glancing out over the city as it began to wake up. He thought about how far he'd come since he'd first started learning from his grandfather. He could barely make it through a single kata at the time without losing his balance. But under his grandfather's patient guidance, he had grown stronger, faster, and more precise. Today, he wasn't just a student of martial arts. He was a force of nature, feeling every fiber of his body alive and buzzing with energy. As the sun climbed a little higher, he closed his eyes and felt a familiar sense of peace wash over him, followed by a memory that surfaced like a stone thrown into a still pond. He was 8 years old, standing in the main training hall, staring up at his grandfather with wide eyes. Master Wu had been a towering presence in Jet's life, with his silver hair tied back and his voice as steady as stone. He remembered how his grandfather had always moved with an unshakable calmness, and on that day he was teaching Jet a basic stance, showing him the importance of grounding himself before any other skill. Balance, Jet, his grandfather said, his voice firm yet gentle. Without balance, you are like a leaf blown by the wind. You must root yourself before you can grow. Jet had nodded, trying to follow his grandfather's instructions. He would shut his eyes, mimicking his grandfather's stance, and allow his words to guide his actions. Yet his feet kept slipping out from under him. He grew frustrated, but his grandfather had only smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Be patient," Master Wu had said, "and respect the time it takes to learn. Your strength is in your spirit. Let it guide you, and you will master this art." The memory faded, and Jet opened his eyes, standing tall on the rooftop once more. As he finished his morning routine, he glanced back at the door leading down to the academy. He knew his family would soon be awake, and breakfast would be waiting. Jet ascended the staircase from the rooftop training space and entered the kitchen of the Iron Palm Academy, where the scent of his mother's cooking filled the air. The academy was quiet, its main hall dimly lit with the morning sun casting long shadows across the training mats. Their family lived in a small apartment connected to the academy. It was a cozy space filled with simple furnishings and reminders of their heritage. Photographs of his grandfather in martial arts competitions, ancient scrolls detailing various forms, and family mementos that stretched back generations. In the kitchen, his mother, Michelle, was bustling around, flipping pancakes on the griddle and humming quietly to herself. The soft light streaming through the small kitchen window caught in her dark shoulder-length hair, bringing out subtle hints of silver that she wore with quiet pride. Her hair was tied loosely at the nape of her neck, a few stray strands framing her face, which was warm and inviting, with soft lines that spoke of laughter and long days spent caring for her family. She turned when she heard Jet's footsteps, offering him a warm smile. "Good morning, Storm," she said, using the nickname his grandfather had given him. "You're up early again." Fing Bao was actually the name his father had given him, but Jet felt Storm sounded better, so that was what he made everyone call him when he was little, and it had stuck with him ever since. Jet grinned, grabbing a cup of water and taking a long drink. "The sun waits for no one," he replied, playfully parroting one of his grandfather's many sayings. He looked up to see his father, David, entering the kitchen with a sleepy yawn, rubbing his eyes and stretching as he took a seat at the small table. David had a lean build, with long limbs that spoke of wiry strength rather than bulk. He wore a faded navy t-shirt, soft and worn from years of use, and a pair of loose-fitting joggers, giving him an unassuming look that contradicted the quiet power he carried. "Already finished your rooftop session?" his father asked with a hint of pride in his voice. David was not as involved in martial arts as Master Wu. Still, he ran the day-to-day operations of the academy with meticulous care, ensuring it stayed afloat despite the challenges. Jet admired his father's dedication, knowing he worked tirelessly to keep their family's legacy alive. Michelle set a plate of pancakes and a small bowl of fresh fruit in front of Jet. "Eat up," she said. "You'll need your energy today. I saw that flyer about a citywide tournament coming up. Have you thought about entering?" Jet looked down at his plate, his thoughts drifting to the possibility of competing. I haven't decided yet," he admitted. "But it might be a good way to test my skills. Besides, the academy could use the publicity." His father nodded, his expression thoughtful. "If you're going to compete, remember it's not just about winning. Represent us with honor and discipline." Before Jet could respond, his grandfather entered the kitchen, his presence as commanding as ever. Despite his age, Master Wu still moved with a grace that belied his years, his gaze sharp and penetrating. He took a seat at the table and poured himself a cup of tea, nodding to Jet with a faint smile. Master Wu's hair was silver, pulled back neatly into a low, tight bun at the nape of his neck, and his skin was weathered, the fine lines etched deeply into his face like the ridges on an ancient stone. His sharp cheekbones and prominent brow lent him an air of fierce intensity, softened only by the calm wisdom in his eyes. "I saw you practicing on the rooftop," Master Wu said, sipping his tea slowly. "You've made progress with the dragon stance, but be mindful of your footing. Control is the heart of the stance." Jet fought hard to suppress the flushing of his cheeks at his grandfather's words, knowing that praise from Master Wu is not given lightly. "Thank you, grandfather," he replied. "I'll keep working on it." As the family settled into their breakfast, his mother kept the conversation light, asking about his plans for the day and teasing him about the crush she suspected he had on a girl at school. Jet laughed, brushing off her questions. He didn't have a crush on anyone, and funny enough, love and romance weren't really taking center stage in his mind right now. Jet felt content. Though they were not wealthy by any means, and the academy was often a financial struggle, they had each other, and that was what mattered most. Jet didn't think he needed a girlfriend. He felt loved enough. His grandfather, however, seemed more pensive than usual. After a while, he cleared his throat and turned to Jet, his expression serious. I have been hearing troubling things about a man named Marcus Chandler," he began, his tone low. "I didn't know he was an American. He runs a dojo downtown, the Southern Dragon Academy. But I am sure it is not a place of honor. His methods, they are fueled by something dishonest. Everywhere that man goes, death follows." "Who is he?" Jet asked, his interest piqued. Master Wu's gaze sharpened, his face hardening. "He believes that technology can replace skill and discipline. He has gathered students who are more interested in power than honor, and his methods reflect that. He has no respect for the traditions we uphold here." "Do you know him, Father?" David asked in Chinese as he studied the worry lines on his father's face. I knew his father and his grandfather. We trained together when we were boys. Marcus Chandler lost both his parents while he was a baby. His grandfather and my friend, Wei, took him in. Bo had a knack for technology. He could tinker and he could invent. Wei taught him martial arts. Wei told me he was gifted. "In martial arts or technology?" Jet interrupted. "Both," his grandfather replied. "But the boy saw martial arts as a thing of the past. Technology was the future, and technology supersedes everything." Wei disagreed with the boy, and they drifted apart. His grandfather stopped talking and looked sad as memories came flooding in. He sighed. 30 years ago, Wei was murdered in his own home. A robbery, they said, and he was beaten to death, he continued. 30 years was a long time ago, yet the pain etched on his face made it seem like he had only heard last week. Jet watched his grandfather's face as he stared into space. It was easy to tell he was reliving the moment. Michelle offered a word of consolation in Chinese for her father-in-law's loss. "And what happened to Marcus? Bo?" Jet asked. "He was 15 at the time and couldn't live alone, so he was sent to Wei's sister. He ran away a month later." "I don't think it was a robbery that killed Wei. It was the boy. I'm sure of it," Jet's grandfather said with such conviction that Jet believed it. 5 years later, word about him surfaced in Singapore. He had changed his name and used his technological skills to amass a fortune. He was running a human trafficking ring, conducting human experiments, and an underground fighting ring where he tested out the success of his experiments. So many lives lost, so many lives ruined. As he spoke, the horror in his eyes was unmistakable. Eventually, he was discovered, but he used his money and influence to buy everything and killed all that would talk. Then he disappeared again. Now, I fear he was resurfaced again in Atlanta as Marcus Chandler," he finished gravely. His new dojo is garnering followers. He boasts new and advanced methods to attain the peak of human ability," David said after the silence in the room heightened. "Do you think he could pose a threat to us?" Chet asked, more concerned about what a competing dojo would do to them. "Fing Bao, you are young and curious, and I trust you. But please, promise me you will stay away from that man. Only death is to be expected from getting involved with that man. Remember that the path we choose is not always the easiest. There will always be those who seek shortcuts, who forsake honor for power. It is up to us to remain steadfast in the light." "I promise," Chet said, a little frightened by the agitation in his grandfather. He had never seen him like that before.